Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm the senior minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is Coffee and Wisdom, when I take a historical and humanist perspective on theological questions, trying to figure out, hey, what's going on from a humanist perspective. On Tuesday, I talked about the idea of disenchantment. No, it's not about not believing that bunnies can pop out of hats. It's an idea from a serious sociologist, Max Weber, back in the early 20th century, in which he says the fate of our times is characterized by rationalization and intellectualization, and above all, by the disenchantment of the world. Precisely the ultimate and most sublime values have retreated from public life either into the transcendental realm of mystic life or into the brotherliness of direct and personal human relations. It is not accidental that our greatest art is intimate and not monumental. You get the idea of what Weber is projecting here. He sees the world as science advances as becoming more and more secular, and therefore more and more disenchanted, that is, not believing in magic or the supernatural anymore, and that will be driven into the personal realm and out of the larger political realm. That's the idea. And yeah, no less of a minister than Nadia Bowles-Weber, not Weber, but Weber, who is the Presbyterian minister, says, you know what? The Enlightenment, as great as it was, robbed us of enchantment on some level. And I just want it back. I want the enchantment back. I'm like, yeah, an angel visited a girl named Mary. You get the idea here. The good reverend is saying, wait a minute, this disenchanted world is just not as interesting as it is if we do believe that angels visit girls named Mary. Well, that's one side of the argument. Of course, we've got one on the other side too. Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the great astrophysicists of our time, he says this: God is an ever receding pocket of scientific ignorance that's getting smaller and smaller and smaller as time moves on. That's probably the best, most concise articulation of the idea that the God of the gaps, God is going to go away as we discover more and more things, why things happen from a scientific point of view. And therefore, we will become more and more secular in society. So, is sociologist Max Weber correct in claiming that science and secularism leads to disenchantment? That's really my question that I want to get at today. Last week, or Tuesday rather, I did mention the idea that, well, wait a minute, 40% of American evangelicals say that they're not going to get the COVID vaccine because they believe that God will protect them from this illness. And so they're going to put their trust in the supernatural rather than in science. So for one thing that we have to see here is that Max Weber was not predicting exactly how things were going to go. Perhaps for some, but not for most, I would say, has disenchantment actually occurred. We can look at, for example, this Pew study. 6 in 10 Christians, nuns, hold at least one New Age belief. So what we have in this particular diagram is, okay, believe spiritual energy can be located in physical things. How many people believe that? 42% of all U.S. adults, as a matter of fact. The second on that list is believe in psychics, that people can in some way intuit the hidden world or the future. And how many believe in reincarnation, and how many believe in astrology? And by that, do you really believe in astrology, and not that, you kind of think it's kind of fun to look at? And so what they do is they put these together and into a net amount. How many people in the United States, adults, believe in at least one of those four things that we would have to call a supernatural belief? Well, 62% of American adults do believe in at least one of those four. spiritual energy in physical things, a belief in psychics, belief in reincarnation, or a belief in that astrology actually has an effect on the physical world. So among Christians, then, 61% believe that. Pew does break that down into Protestant, which is at 57%, evangelical at 47%, mainline, historically black, and Catholic at 70%. So there you have that the majority of U.S. Christians believe in at least one of these things that we would call supernatural. Now, do notice they're not asking, is there a God? Rather, they're asking some what would be considered New Age beliefs, things that are really not part of Christian tradition. And that's why the very interesting net, the lowest on this group of believing in these things are actually evangelicals, 47%, less than 50%, because they don't think these things are Christian. I would think that's it anyway. Well, what about the unaffiliated? Well, guess what? It's exactly the same number as the number of U.S. Christians, 62%. Now, it's not real mysterious that atheists would be the people with the lowest percentage of all. Only 22% of atheists believe in some kind of New Age belief system. 56% of agnostics, so that's getting back up there in the Protestant Christian realm, and the nothing in particular is what we nowadays call nones at 78%. And that's one of the things we've talked about on Coffee and Wisdom, is that nones don't necessarily become secular materialist, atheists, or agnostics, but rather they're just not connected with any kind of religious tradition. So yes, disenchantment, not among the U.S. population anyway. And that's one of the things we can consider here. Here's a magical thinking pigeon. He's thinking maybe if I pick up that cigarette butt a third time, it will turn into food. Well, could be, but I'm really, really doubting that the pigeon is going to get any food out of a cigarette butt. And magical thinking is not going to help with that. But there are books out there that argue that actually magical thinking, enchanted thinking is actually good for us. Matthew Hudson has a book called The 7 Laws of Magical Thinking, How Irrational Beliefs Keep Us Happy, Healthy, and Sane. This goes against a lot of the arguments that a Max Weber is going to make, that we're going to become more and more rational. Oh, guess what? It frees us to be irrational. Well, that's certainly something we could argue and think about. But even people who are scientific in their ways of thinking, predominantly, often are enchanted thinkers as well. Just because we call it enchantment doesn't mean it's necessarily supernatural in any way. One of the best articulations of this is Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. Those of you who read the book know that she is a scientifically trained botanist, but also a Native American who considers the other traditions to be equally valid within this way of thinking. And certainly that leads to an enchanted way of seeing the natural world. She writes this in Braiding Sweetgrass: even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of joy and wonder. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. That's enchantment, isn't it? And of course, we can go right back to good old Charles Darwin, who said this: whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. Is the world disenchanted? Well, number one, the numbers say for most Americans, no, the majority. And even if you are a materialist, naturalist like me, the world still doesn't have to be a mere place of hollow scientific rules. It can be enchanted. As we learned last Sunday at First Unitarian Society, when we were interviewing J.F. Martell, one of the two podcasters of something called Weird Studies. Weird studies are those things that don't fit into the Enlightenment kind of scientific thinking. They go outside of the boxes that we have created. And this is a burgeoning field of study looking at how people can live and do live in an enchanted world, usually without the added supernatural and certainly the added specifics of dogmatic monotheisms. So definitely look that up if you're interested in studying the weird and the unexpected. Thanks a lot to our financial supporters, including Anita Martinez, Marcy Lessler, and Ren Nippling. And thanks for listening this week. I do have a live chat with some of our folks on Fridays at 9 a.m. Central Time. If you would like that Zoom link, just email me, minister@firstunitarian.org, and I will send that to you, and you can join in our conversation. Thanks so much for joining me this week.